LSIP webinar. My first action is to let you all know that we are recording today's session. As it does automatically. So just to say that the webinar is going to be recorded. If we could just ask people to make sure that while we are having the presentations, that you are muted and your camera's turned off. The running order for today, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context as to why we're here. We're going to hear from Jack and Carl at CADA, who are going to present to us this afternoon, and we've then got some employer insights from Dan Swift from the AMRC, and from Tom from Hybrid Air Vehicles. We'll then have an opportunity to have questions and comments from the floor, which you can do either by popping your hand up or in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And then we're going to come to Dan Fell from who's the Chief Exec at Doncaster Chamber to tell us about the next steps. And so hopefully we have got everybody here that we need. Just want to give you a little bit of background as to why we're here this afternoon. So many of you are probably already aware of this, but it's not a bad thing to just remind people that the DfE commissioned local skills improvement plans, and Doncaster as the lead employer representative body are leading on this work for the region. And the purpose of the local skills improvement plans was to put employer voices at the heart of skills provision and skills development to ensure that businesses in the region were able to access the skills that they need for now and for in the future. So through the local skills improvement plan, there's been a series of recommendations that have been made, and we're working really hard to ensure that we can implement practical recommendations that help our business community. And this webinar today is the fifth in a series of 8 webinars. And this has been an opportunity for us to go to the business community to do a deep dive into a sector and then feed back those findings to the skills community. So the data in the region that we're already aware of, the purpose of these deep dives is to really put some meat on the bones and some stories from the private sector to help shape course provision and help shape our skills community and give that real rich intel and insight. So we have done deep dives into the construction sector, the manufacturing sector, the visitor economy sector, professional services, and we're here today for aviation. We also have coming in this series of events, AI and tech and veterans. And we'll share a link in the chat that gives you the page where all the reports and all the previous webinars are. So if you do want to have a look at any of those, and then you've got the opportunity to have some time to read in more deep, and that's where you will find this webinar hosted as well. I just want to stress that as although the chambers are leading on this work and Doncaster Chamber are leading on this work, we do engage wider than just the chamber network. So we work in partnership with other business representative organisations and the FSB, the IOD, the CBI and Sheffield Digital to make sure that we have a wide reach that's really representative of all the employers in South Yorkshire. So I think that's enough from me just in terms of explaining the concept around the local skills improvement plans. And I'm sure that all of you who work in this world are aware of the great work that the chambers have been doing to just bring the employer voice closer to the skills provision voice to ensure that we are all working for the greater good of the region. So in terms of the order of events today, we're going to hear from CADA. We're going to hear from Tom, we're going to hear from Dan, and then we'll have the chance to have questions. So I am now going to hand over to Jack and Carl at CADA so they can take us through their findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So my name's Carl Dalgleish. This is my colleague Jack, speaking to you from Park Hill in Sheffield. We are research partner and have been doing a number of the interviews for these deep dives. So a bit about our presentation today then, a bit of background about why aviation skills and airport development's important, a bit about where the sector is heading. There's an awful lot of changes. I'm sure Dan knows more than me about this, but there are an awful lot of changes in this sector. And there's a lot of technology change and sustainability change happening over the next decade or so. Where are we now with skills? It's a bit more of an embryonic sector, this, because we know that we've got plans to develop the airport, but they've not fully yet come to fruition. So a bit of this is sense checking where we might head in the future. Of course, airports are important for exports, for employment, for technology development, and that's the plans here. And I want to try and paint a picture for you a little bit of what this might mean for South Yorkshire. And what does it mean for training provision as well? So the LSIP is very much about the provider sector galvanising behind economic opportunities. And this is clearly one of the mayoral opportunities that we've got in South Yorkshire. So a bit about that. And then a brief summary. Unlike some of the other reports, there's a bit of a call to action at the end of this one about where we might go for the sector strategically. And then we're going to hand over to our Dan and Tom to give us their thoughts after our presentation. Thanks, Jack. We're going to share the presentation. Typically, we like to speak to 20 to 30 employers. This one, we spoke to 18 firms, and then we also had a really interesting workshop at the airport. We had the CEO of Munich Airport there. We had their lead training manager. We had a guy called the Airport Guy, who is a TikTok influencer and aviation ambassador. Absolutely fascinating, talking about careers in aviation. And we had some airport specialists. So that half-day workshop was really insightful, to be honest, because we got sort of global insights and things. The idea, as Lou said, is to get employer insights and understand local skills priorities for the sector. The questionnaire we designed with providers at a fairly senior level. We spoke to CEOs of South Yorkshire colleges, for instance, and the universities about the kinds of things that would be useful to us. So this report then really is looking at the current picture and the future picture as best we can. And the idea is that it informs the valuable work and thinking of stakeholders. So for instance, there are parallel studies going on now around Gateway East and quite a lot of thinking and mobilisation around master planning and things like that. So this is designed to offer a current skills perspective of where we are. So when we do these studies, we like to do a definition for the business support providers and the chambers. And this one was so broad. And in fact, if you speak to the airport guy, he'll tell you whatever skill you've got, you can find a role at an airport, whether it's hospitality, finance, technology. So it really is quite a diverse sector. And of course, you've got the actual services of running an airport, the activities and operation for the safety and comfort of passengers and the smooth running of the airport. And then you've got airport operations, so aeronautical services, passengers and airlines, and then some of the ground stuff that that you'll be familiar with. But I think that just is part of the picture. And what we've got at DSA is a much wider opportunity for the supply chain. So we know we're doing stuff on clean energy. We know there's some really exciting work in the sub-region on hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuel. And there's quite a bit of work on next generation aircraft. So it's hoped that the airport really will become a hub for aircrafts of the future, and more sustainable flying, much more sustainable engines, next generation engines. We've got the technologies in the sub-region around lightweighting and things like that and composites. So it really does offer an opportunity for the supply chain and the wider aviation ecosystem across a number of sectors, aero, defence, all sorts of sectors. So it's a really complex ecosystem. There is a difference between larger and smaller airports. To some degree, smaller airports can be quite challenging to manage, and very different skills needed for both commercial and general aviation as well. So a real mixed bag. And if you look in the report, there's a little bit more detail about that then. So this first bit really is about the sorts of skills that might be needed, future workforce skills, and then looking a little bit about automation and things. So I think one of our guests is going to tell you a little bit about soft skills that they're looking for. But one thing that clearly came through from the research was about people-centered skills. a fair proportion of those roles have that customer interface. So a commitment from the workforce is absolutely vital from people. And the CEO of Munich told us all about the importance of that customer interface. You can go a long way with good customer service skills. Now, there are some challenges around the workforce, cost constraints. There is shift patterns in there. You've obviously got geographically dispersed workforce and very quite distinct roles. So getting that single culture can be quite a challenge, is what they told us. And the aviation sector is not without its challenges. So, we've got trade deals now. We've had the UK's exit from the EU, COVID, energy costs. So this did result in a bit of a hollowing out a couple of years ago and has resulted in some skill gaps. So there has been some market volatility that has disrupted these models. So, and obviously we have actually still got a closed airport. So there are legitimate concerns as well around the sustainability of airports and there. So it's not without its challenges, this sector. And that's the path that decision makers are trying to navigate at the moment. So despite these challenges, the people we spoke to were looking to scale up. They were interested in having better international connections and excited by the plans of support and investment in the airport, because it meant they felt that they could invest in their own future air force as well. So thinking about sort of future skill needs, the qualifications are really, really varied. I've got a diagram to explain some of this, and they spread right the way across generic, themed, and specific skills. And as I mentioned, the soft skills were particularly important. This is from the Future Aviation Skills Strategy. And I suppose what it illustrated for me is that actually we have got a big pathway here right the way across. And, there is a misconception that we've got mainly level 1 and 2 jobs at airports, very basic. That's quite far from the reality. And the picture here is that actually we've got a lot of STEM level jobs and some highly, highly specialist jobs right up at level 7 and 8. So the engagement of the universities will be absolutely vital, and pathways right the way through at level 1 and 2 will be important. And if you look at the volumes there to the right of that diagram, levels 4 and 5, we are looking at some quite high levels of technical skills there. So the Institute of Technology will play presumably a fairly vital part in some of the skills provision that will be required at the wider airport site. So you can enter the industry at level 1. The entry restrictions are quite low, although you can't have a criminal record, but for the ground handling jobs, technical qualification is not required, but really practical experience is welcome. A lot of them have in-house training. So MBQs level 3 to 5, obviously required for the engineering professions. And we know we've got the AMRC Training Centre here today, obviously does exactly that. Degree level qualifications required for those higher stuff. And one thing, this is quite a regulated sector, so you do require some industry-specific certifications, for instance, for piloting and environmental specialisms. And as I mentioned, some postgraduate qualifications. So engineers and technical talent covers right the way across design, production, maintenance, and data, and they're a key priority and in high demand. Now, at the moment, we haven't quite got the volumes of supply that will be required for the airport and all of the associated supply chain activities. So it would mean a ramping up of provision as to where we stand now. The MRO, that's the maintenance, repair and overhaul skills development, includes things that we haven't had for a while in South Yorkshire. So that's about maintenance engineers trained for specific aircraft types and propulsion systems. We do have a lot of propulsion expertise just in neighbouring East Midlands, and so we may need to draw on that wider skills ecosystem even outside South Yorkshire. Now, it's the adoption of digital systems and processing means there's quite a pace of technological change. So all of even the routine operations are seeing increased digitalization and automation. What employers told us was we just need good digital literacy pathways because they can teach you on the system. So the basic digital literacy is required for some of those entry-level jobs, and core digital literacy, really important. And then what they'll do is they'll do customized training for some of the real-world tasks and software systems. Now, the actual airport operations, there is a move towards more autonomous systems, advanced sensors, cyber security, and these do require pretty advanced digital skills and an understanding of quantum, foundational AI and automation. So we do have quite a high level of digital skills around AI and automation, and the focus on sustainability at the airport will require some very, very specific green skills around hydrogen, nuclear, aerospace supply chain, and supply chain technologies like lightweighting. So some of those skills we have, some of those skills we will need to develop. So the transition, just to be clear, from conventional fuel in about 10 years or so will require very new and adapted training and apprenticeship standards. And it may be that partners like the AMRC and the FE sector and the universities will need to develop new provision in response to that transition for maintenance logistics. We've also mentioned some other things here like ground storage workers, health and safety, and fire and rescue staff. So there's a question about whether you import those skills or you provide them. Places like Munich have big training centres integrated into the airports. Throughout this presentation, there's a couple of quotes. I'm not going to read them out, but you've got the presentation, so you can it just embellishes some of what I'm saying, really. Jack's going to tell us a little bit about current skills. Thank you, Jack.
Brilliant. So yeah, so Carl touched on sort of future priorities and what employers are looking at going forwards, but we obviously spoke some about current skills pipeline, how they're using apprenticeships, using tailored training to sort of address current skills gaps. So there's sort of general growing recognition about the importance of apprenticeships and how they can support the development of aviation specific skills and the sort of pathways they can open up sort of long-term workforce planning. Now, engineering and maintenance are sort of natural fits, but there was a consensus among a lot of those that we spoke to that there's sort of a need to promote apprenticeships where they can add value. So there's not just the sort of technical roles as well. Some, however, did think that in the more regulated parts of the sector that apprenticeships are not necessarily as suitable. Sort of need for quite a lot of experience, sort of prevent a lot of people just naturally stepping into those roles at a sort of lower level. Employers sort of do need help identifying suitable roles for apprenticeships going forwards as well. Sort of preparing for supervision, setting realistic employee learning expectations as well off the back of that. And sort of strong communication between providers and employers might help any early dropout and ensure sort of a good fit between the sort of young employee and the apprenticeship itself. There is also, as is something that we highlight through a lot of the sector reports we did, sort of general feeling there's a lack of visibility around apprenticeship options and limited understanding from some about how to make them work, which was a little bit of hesitancy for some employers in terms of engaging on that side of things. Future occupations, so Carl was mentioning a little bit about that, will result in new and adapted apprenticeships. There will be sort of changing curriculum and new programs being developed. So that could include hydrogen, like Carl said, fully electric aircraft, or drones might be a potential option for apprenticeship going forwards. And there's always the need for sort of a review of existing provision there to ensure that new apprenticeships, new curriculums are future-proofed, and there's those sort of clear progression pathways there. So there is a critical requirement as well in terms of air traffic controllers. So Carl's touched on the sort of skills and roles that we need going forwards. DSA will need, for example, 14 to 15 air traffic control staff. Ground handling operations, obviously, as we touched on, we required, and flight instructors as well as airport rescue and firefighting services. Engineering, electrical, engineering, sort of the most difficult areas to recruit into, as a lot of employers have been telling us. We sort of touched upon during these interviews recruitment approaches and recruitment routes. So it's quite varied across the take. So there's a more structured approach with some employers. They use things like anonymized CVs for sort of easier access. Others rely on networks or reputation or sort of existing connections. And some have started introducing or were already operating more practical assessments to sort of test those skills outside just an interview environment. Larger employers generally tended to have more structured induction programs, regular performance reviews, appraisals, one-to-ones. Smaller businesses were still developing a lot of these processes and trying to get these off the ground. Across all the sort of sector reviews we've done, we've touched on things like flexible and hybrid working. It's obviously not as common in aviation. A lot of the roles required staff to be on site, and a lot of it's quite customer facing, so it wasn't as much of the norm as some of the reviews we've done. And then we also like to ask about wellbeing support initiatives that are adopted. So as with induction processes and appraisals, larger employers have more formalised structures when it came to wellbeing. So dedicated services, employee wellbeing. For smaller employers was often more focused on the culture side of things rather than actual policies or plans that have been implemented. So personal gestures, for example, and more of that direct communication there. And as with the other slides, we've got a few quotes here that I won't read out, but just to give a little bit of idea. One employer there talking about apprenticeships, one about sort of hard to fill vacancies, and one about sort of general support of employee wellbeing. So Colin's going to touch more on the training side of things now.
Yes. And again, there's quite a difference between the larger firms and the smaller firms in relation to training, with the larger firms having much more in-house capabilities. You do find some very specialist training in this area, compliance and safety, for instance. And I think aviation businesses were keen to point out that it's important that the training keeps track with the changing pace of the industry, and they're keen to work with providers on developing tailored courses that address their requirements. Management stuff is a little bit more done in-house, less formally. So mentoring and practical training sort of played a key role there. Now, I've mentioned the Munich Dedicated Training Academy. It did sound quite interesting because of the features they got, and clearly Munich's a much bigger airport. But I suppose question for people here: could something that offers apprenticeships and dual degree programs be offered, at the site? They also offer CPD, internships, training programs, loads of work with schools and entry-level programs. And they're keen to give people sort of very hands-on experience. What the aviation ambassador told me was, you need to get people early and get, people that are enthused in aviation tend to stay enthused in aviation, once they've been open to it. The Munich one even has sort of startup labs for spin-outs and things like that to airport-related innovation activity, which I thought was a really interesting thing that, DSA could certainly think about. Clearly, in a highly regulated sector, there's a need for continuous training and upskilling. So there is something about having those facilities there. Businesses, again, keen to work with colleges. They quite like short practical training over content-rich courses. Things like the AMR-CPD offer, for instance, where you've got, 2-3 days that people can do, or they can do a blended option. That sort of thing would go down well, I imagine. The aviation industry, on the AR/VR, we ask every sector about that. This sector's really advanced in that area, as you won't be surprised to hear. And there, it's really commonplace, AR and VR training. So we've got some virtual immersive training suites in here, and we have some simulators in Rotherham College, for instance. But that's certainly an area that people are using and would be keen to continue to use. And clearly cost is the only barrier to people doing more of that, really. There's a picture there of the Rotherham simulator. And a couple of quotes there on the CPD, as I mentioned. And the final section really is just from Jack, is about how employers would like to engage with providers around their skill needs.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I suppose this covers engagement with providers, current and going forward, but also covered topics such as engagement with those further removed from the labour market, and the sort of general topic of how to inspire the next generation into wanting to be part of the aviation industry. So, I mean, in terms of those further from the labour market, so it's the veterans, prison leavers, and those sort of needs those out of education, training point for some time. The extent to which it was commonplace across the sector is quite limited, and largely this was sort of reference to the regulatory nature of the sector, which is obviously industry standards rather than sort of employer developed policies. Things like security clearance requirements obviously are a slight barrier for some cohorts. That said, there is some good practice in the engagement of veterans and service leavers. So like Lou said, there's a report on that coming out in a few months, but they are quite well suited to a lot of roles, sort of some of the softer skills, which I think Tom's going to pick up on, but sort of discipline, resilience, teamwork, and support from providers on reasonable adjustments or role matching, mapping skills to current positions and regulation support might help some employers overcome barriers to recruitment. There was a piece around sort of increasing the visibility of aviation and STEM opportunities in the schools and colleges on inspiring the next generation. So the sector is facing growing competition from a lot of other sectors, particularly sort of digital as well, and the need for sort of promoting it was highlighted quite a few times. And there is a critical role in bridging the awareness gap between providers and employers, sort of co-design outreach activities that demonstrate the breadth of the sector in terms of the roles out there, sort of challenge any stereotypes and ensure that those roles are visible and feel attainable to young people and are also of interest as well. So we discussed curriculums with employers that we spoke to. So some did feel there was a mismatch between the curriculum and the industry itself, which contributed to some of the skills gaps and shortages we discussed. And generally, employers were quite willing to support curriculum advisors and education facilities going forward to respond to these skills gaps and help inform curriculums. While collaborations do exist for training, and there are some good, strong sector-specific networks in place, there was some reticence between some of the employers sort of collaborating amongst smaller and more specialist firms. Engagement can be driven more by a desire to maintain market presence. And again, we've got a few quotes here from some businesses around how to inspire the next generation. So a lot of employers discuss sort of that practical element as well, while school talks and careers fairs are interesting. There's an element of that practical part of it and showcasing the sector, making it feel like real life, and it's quite helpful. And a quote there about partnering with skill providers going forward, some really good activity that's ongoing in the sub-region. So we've talked a lot, so Carl's going to give a little bit of a summary of the things.
I mean, just to add to that one, I spoke to this guy called Mohammed Tahir, who's the aviation ambassador. He's called the airport guy. You can follow him on Instagram. I think he was in Abu Dhabi or something when I did the interview with him. He travels around a lot and he speaks to a lot of CEOs at the airport. And it's really interesting to just look at his feed and his take about inspiring the next generation and the importance of social media to engage younger people about airport opportunities. So do have a look there if you want to understand current thinking in relation to, where all airports are going and how to inspire people. So the final bit really is a bit of a call to action. It's a big opportunity, this DSA. The more we looked into it, the more we realised how many different areas it covered. They're already predicting sort of 5,000 or so jobs just in the adjacent sites. So that will cover quite a range of skills that we talked about. And we think this will require some considerable mobilisation of the skills ecosystem, almost unprecedented in the last couple of years, because it will cut across so many institutional and provider offers from level 1 to 8. So I suppose the final call to action is that this might require quite a creative partnership approach of provision in terms of mobilising that skills pipeline around those typical work streams, whether it's MRO, engineering, ground operations, or ancillary services. And that's before we even get on to some of the supply chain stuff. So we think there's more detailed work to look at the ebbs and flows, and as the sector embeds some of those advancements, you'll need some real investment to take advantage of this, I guess, once in a generation opportunity. Thank you for your patience. Sorry, there's quite a lot to cover there, Lou.
You know what though, Carl? I mean, it's so interesting. It's so comprehensive, really insightful. I don't think I had realised the depth and breadth of the opportunity, as you say, across so many different types of jobs, so many different qualification levels. So what a huge opportunity for this region if we can work smart, work collaboratively to pipeline and promote careers in this sector to people in this region. It's not just young people, it's people of all ages, isn't it? But to create really good jobs and long-term jobs as well. So thank you. I've made lots of notes, but I'll save those for the Q&A. So Tom, if I could come to you first, please. So I've asked Tom to give an employer perspective. So Tom, obviously you're the chief exec of hybrid air vehicles, and I know you also have a degree in aerospace engineering and advanced system engineering. So you're at that top level of understanding. But from your perspective, your interpretation of this feedback and your worldview really as an employer in this sector.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. I think loads of what's come out in the report really resonates with me. As you say, I'm CEO of Hybrid Air Vehicles. We're at the forefront of sustainable aviation. We're on the aerospace side, so it's design, engineering, and production is the core of what we do. And we're working to bring a big and low emissions aircraft into service and to build our business from about 65 people today up to 1,200 people, where our operations will be centered around Doncaster. So very relevant report. As I say, I'm more on the design side than on the airport side, but a few of the things that came out in the report, I mean, I go back a long way. When I was in school, I was told that getting into aerospace was really hard. And that kind of fired me up. It motivated me and it got me on the path that I'm on. But as I've gone through my career, I've reflected back on that conversation, that casual conversation at a school careers event, and just thought about how many people would have been put off by that comment that it's very hard. And I think what comes out in the report is it's not. There's a job in the sector for everybody. There are multiple roles at multiple different levels. Each of them have got different skill requirements, and I'm sure the MRC will talk about that much more than I can. But some of the roles are highly regulated. We're looking for people who can really be very, very process aware. Some are very creative and very innovative. And it's all about having the right person and the right skills and the right job. We don't really want our pilots to be creative and innovative when they're landing, but we do want our design engineers to be creative and innovative when they're creating new concepts. So we've got these multiple pathways, multiple roles. And I've just been trying to think, what comes out of the report in terms of what unifies those across this sector. And for me, it's this aspect of the soft skills that we look for. And came out in the report that that's really being driven by the commercial aspects of a lot of these roles being customer facing, which of course they are in airports and aviation. I also think there's another angle to this, which is there is a unifying theme right across the sector, which is about safety. And that safety culture is at the heart of everything. These diverse roles and diverse organizations are all unified by the fact that we have to deliver aviation as the safest form of transport in the world. And that manifests itself through things like what we call a just culture, which basically means nobody ever suffers an adverse consequence in aviation from making an honest mistake or from raising something, even if it's outside of their remit. And conversely, if we've got anybody that is repeatedly making the same mistake or not coming forward with the safety issue that they know about, that's where we do step in, and we'll address that as a very serious issue. So it's all about transparency, it's about openness, and alongside customer service, that's what drives some of the ethos that will span all of these roles. So breaking that down one step further, I think there are sort of four things that are really key to that. One is diligence. So a lot of these roles, you do need to be there on time. You are customer facing. Some of them are spanning the world, different time zones. You need resilience. You need that diligence to be present, and to adhere to the quality standards and the regulatory standards that we have in place. So we're looking for that diligence. We're also looking for observation skills. So situational awareness, people that can put what they're doing in the wider context, and really importantly, notice any differences, notice anything that's out of the ordinary, notice where something's not quite the way it should be, which then leads you on to the third thing, which is communication. So high-end communication skills will unify all of these roles. Obviously, we need them at different levels, different roles, but basically we're looking for people that are prepared to speak out, can speak out clearly, be proactive in the way that they communicate with people and make sure their message is getting across. And the fourth thing I think we look for is teamwork. We've got this big ecosystem. We're doing a complex job of keeping aircraft operating on time. We've got to be safety conscious, and we've got to do that against delivery pressure, and that needs teamwork. And so just to wrap that up, if you just think about a cabin crew's job, we see the cabin crew when they're serving us in the cabin mostly. But these guys, they're turning up to shifts that will change on a daily basis. They're doing it often across multiple time zones. They are needing to observe what's going on in the cabin around them. They've got a primary role for safety. They will be communicating with people from all sorts of different cultures in different languages, and they'll be communicating with the pilots and the rest of their crew. And what you probably don't realize is that they're doing it in a new team every single time. So most times when cabin crew turn up for one of the big airlines, they're working with people they haven't worked with before on that flight. And so we do a lot of work to make sure that they can communicate well and get the right outcomes. So that little example of cabin crew, you could take that and deploy it to almost any job across aviation. Those same things of observation skills, diligence, communication, and teamwork, they really are the sort of the core for me of what we use to build our safety culture. The last thing I'll say that came out to me from this conversation is definitely look up what the airport guy is doing. He is inspiring, he's creating opportunities, and he's really showing what the industry is all about. I'd heartily recommend anybody with an interest to just follow Mo to hear the airport guy, because you learn a lot.
Tom, thank you. That was really helpful, really insightful, really interesting. And I think observation, communication, diligence, teamwork, that's going to be really interesting for the various and the whole range of skills providers that are on this call. Because you can probably say a lot of sectors need those, but it's really pertinent to this sector, isn't it? And I've probably not realised the level of having to work with new people, because that does require a certain kind of attitude and skill set to be able to do that and do it well, definitely. Thank you, Tom. So Dan, if I could come to you. So Dan, you are from the AMRC Training Centre, and I understand you're also an apprenticeship ambassador for the Yorkshire and Humber region. So yeah, I'd be really keen to get your perspective on this report and the main sort of takeaways for you.
Yeah, thank you, Louisa. Afternoon, everybody. So as Louisa said, I'm Dan Swift. I'm part of the business development team at the AMRC Training Centre. So I account manage a majority of the AMRC employee group that utilise us for apprenticeship delivery. So a lot of the report, obviously, in a way, puts quite a big smile on a provider's face in terms of saying that we're looking at levels 3, 4, 5, and 6, which is the AMRC's apprenticeship remit. And they're looking for design, maintenance, manufacturing, which again is all our remit. So from a provider point of view, obviously we're kind of geared up and made for that industry and those foundation skills that the sector are looking for. A little bit kind of doesn't marry up in terms of what we see. So the sector's saying that in those particular skills, they're finding local talent hard to come by and poor, so they're going elsewhere. The natural mindset would be, well, if you can't find your local talent, then you need to start developing your own local talent in pipeline. But we're not seeing that in terms of the volume. So everybody that will know within the kind of provider sector that's been working with AMRC this year, we've had over 6,000 candidates expressing an interest in joining the AMRC to do an apprenticeship. We've certainly not had 6,000 vacancies from employers. So there are lots of young people that are highly educated at degree level, A level, GCSE level, that are highly motivated at level 3, 4, and 6 sector, that are wanting to get into the industry, but the volume of vacancies aren't marrying up with the volume of candidates. We've got more candidates than vacancies. And I think that needs to be a major stoke in the industry to kind of generate that interest. The only way you're going to get young people to engage is to give them an opportunity to be employed. So more vacancies is what's going to be needed. The report mentioned employers not really understanding the apprenticeship offer. A couple of weeks ago, LSIP put on an employer event in Rotherham where all the major key providers, University of Sheffield, AMRC, Hallam, Doncaster, all came together to collaborate to provide employers with information, advice and guidance from level 1 up to level 8. And I think everybody that attend would agree that the event wasn't as heavily populated by employers as we would have hoped. So the turnout wasn't particularly strong. So if there's a lack of understanding and events are being put on, but the engagement's low, why is that? Would be a question that we would ask back, because we would have expected that kind of event with all the main key providers in the room to be well populated, and the argument would be we expected it to be heavier in employers, which it wasn't. So there's that side as well. So the providers are coming together with the IoT and the LSIP. We're working in collaboration like we've never worked before. The two universities, the colleges, we're all kind of looking at what we succeed in and where the employers can utilize our services best. So there's definitely a market for the employers to gain in. I completely get the report with regards to specific training, like the MRO. The flip side to the MRO challenge will be, number one, you will need experienced staff to be able to deliver that. Industry is paying more than education. So how do we entice that staff away to become trainers? How do we get around that problem while industry is paying a lot more than what education does? And again, for a provider, similar to, like, for example, like the AMRC or the IoTs, to invest in that level of kit to be able to train the apprentices on, they're going to need a minimum number of apprentices over X amount of years to make that cost model viable. So that would involve a commitment from an employer group to say, we will give you X amount of employers, similar to what we did when we launched our composites apprenticeships. So we came together with Teledyne and McLaren F1, McLaren Automotive, ARC, and various other composite-based employers to kind of go, you're all going to need to at least meet a target number to make this cost viable over the next 4 years. So we worked with that employer group to kind of go, yes, this is the numbers that we will give you year in, year out. And when you're speaking about the lightweight industry, obviously composites at level 3 is now a new emerging theme for apprentices. We've got the Boeing facility that's opening up next to 2050. So all that is coming together from an employer and a provider point of view. It's just kind of making the dots connect, really. It's all there. I think it's just kind of needs connecting slightly better. And I think that's the key. The providers are now in a place where we're all talking and we're all working in collaboration. It's get the employees to buy into that now and kind of start engaging a bit more, I suppose.
Thank you, Dan. That's really interesting. That kind of consortium approach that you've talked about with the composite apprenticeships is certainly interesting. And I'm really pleased on this call today. We've got colleges, UTCs, universities, obviously your training centre. So what I'd like to do now is open the floor really for questions and comments, either of Carl and Jack at CADA, of Tom at Hybrid, or of Dan at the AMRC, or any thoughts, questions, comments that people have. Happy for people to put hands up or pop things in the chat. But yeah, I'm just really interested to hear what other people's perspectives are on what they've heard. And as I see it, the opportunity for the region. How do we maximise this opportunity for the region, bearing in mind we have such a great plethora of skills providers that can respond to this opportunity. Don't be shy. Keith. Thank you. If you'd like to come in
Yeah.
on the South
Sorry,
Yorkshire Apprenticeship
Louisa.
Hub.
Yeah, sorry, it doesn't seem like for some reason my camera doesn't seem to want to work. Thanks everybody, and I think it's really interesting to listen through, and really interesting sort of from Dan's perspective around engineering. But I do think that this is a kind of a broader opportunity as well, because we need to think about the other sort of supply chain around this. So again, there's going to be huge opportunity for things such as digital, for logistics, for the supply chain. And one of the things that I just wonder is we've got the new growth and skills levy, which will give us something that is quite unique in the fact that we could explore what the sector, now I'm going to call it the sector, but what the airport actually needs with regards to sort of delivery of skills. So again, it might be that some of this stuff is kind of 12, 18 month, 2-3 year development programs, but also there might be some sort of short bits of upskilling that's required and such like that. And I just wonder whether there is an opportunity for us to sort of sit down and create this really formal collaborative approach to this, which could actually generate almost like a new ecosystem of training that could be sustainable over a number of years, where actually there is a kind of suite, and it's very, very clear for employers in the region what's available, but also the opportunity as technology changes. We've got AI and such like that, which is changing our world rapidly, but also the opportunity to think about the future as well. So just wonder whether there is a kind of methodology we could use to set up a working group to think about, well, how can we actually sort of deliver the skills that they need?
Thanks, Keith. And do you want to come in on the growth and skills levy? Because I know that's something you've kind of lobbied quite hard around, apprenticeship levy, and how could it be better repurposed? And I don't know yet what detail we've had about how the growth and skills levy can be utilised going forward. Whether that's an opportunity to explore.
Sorry, was that to me, Louisa?
I was actually doing Dan Fell, but either
is Dan.
Yeah, it's good. With your the South Yorkshire skills hat on.
Yeah, I'm like you, I'm not fully sighted on the detail of some of this stuff, but like it just feels like we're all wanting to push in the same direction with this stuff. And I think, interestingly, if we had to the Doncaster's Education and Skills Board this morning, inevitably we were talking about aviation skills again, because it's such a key opportunity for this region. And again, it does sort of feel to me that the size of the prize is huge here. Like Doncaster Sheffield Airport is going to create something like 5,500 direct jobs, 6,500 indirect jobs over like the next, 2 or 3 decades. It's enormous. And it feels that with the agglomeration benefit that comes with that, we need to have a sort of similarly ambitious education and skills proposition that, looking at the chat, in the comment, needs to kind of be absolutely all age, and this needs activity that's focused at sort of primary and secondary school level, kind of piquing interest in kind of creating pathways early doors, and then people all of ranges, in terms of kind of retraining and reskilling and stuff. But where I kind of see the prize is like it does feel like there's something like a center of excellence here that kind of brings everything together into one place. And that could be another compelling reason from people from elsewhere in the country to come to South Yorkshire to, in the first instance study, but then hopefully kind of work, live, play, and all those kind of things as well. So I just kind of, I know I've kind of gone off topic a little bit with that, Luke, but I kind of think I want to kind of paint the size of the prize here. And so the detail bits of this, the particular funding schemes, like the particular way we apply certain bits and pieces of the system, that's for the kind of royal we, all of us on this call and others in the partnership, to kind of figure out and get that right, because the answer here needs to be yes, what's the question? Because that's the ethos that the sector needs, and the economic opportunity dictates as well.
Absolutely. And there's a role for everybody to play in that, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely.
The opportunity of the region is huge. James, Skill Street, you popped a question in the comments. They said really in the chat, sorry, really positive and insightful presentation, key sector for our regional national economy. Thank you. A couple of questions and observations from me. So raising aspirations, how do you plan to make aviation, travel and tourism associated careers accessible to South Yorkshire communities? Lots of work that we can do collectively on changing perceptions of the industry to be more inclusive. And then early careers talent, how should our early career strategy start to make a more sustainable long-term talent pipeline? Some great work at FE and HE level and real strengths in the region, but how are we reinforcing this message earlier down the education pyramid to inspire the next generation earlier? So I know we've got Sheffield College on the line, and I do know that obviously you have leisure tourism, and you actually have an aircraft hangar at Sheffield College. I don't think we've got Children's University represented or the HEP board, but I'm just wondering, some of the work they do in the South Yorkshire primary schools is probably going to be, we think they're really well. If you think, how long is it till they're coming into the workforce? 10 years kind of goes like that. And if by the age of 7 you've already decided what you can or can't do, we do need to start promoting those careers if we're going to have a long-term kind of pathway. I don't know if you want to come in, James, just with about what Skill Street are doing in that space, because I think you've got an aviation section, haven't you, down at Skill Street at Gulliver's Kingdom.
We have, yeah. Thanks, Lou, so much for the intro and reading my very wordy and detailed observation. Not much a question, was it? But I switched my camera on for that purpose because behind me you'll see a 737 aircraft in our building that we've already put over 1,600 young people onto.
Is that not a screen backdrop? Is that actually...
It's an actual backdrop, that, Lou. So I'm sat in an event space, and behind me I've got old 1970s aircraft seats there from an aircraft and a quarter of a 737 X-Jet to
so on brand.
That's just part of the offer, and the reason we put this in here was to create a unique experience for people earlier. So my point around early careers talent was that of how early does that early careers pipeline start to feed into FE, to feed into HE and some of the fantastic partners on this call as well. But the aspirational piece is really significant for me. A lot of our communities have never been on an aircraft, never been to an airport, or may never do so. So it's how do we create, I think, to Dan Fell's point, a longer term strategy around almost a centre of excellence and maximising the training facilities we have at the colleges. I think the simulator was showed earlier as well as the Sheffield College Travel and Tourism, as well as the university's airline management degrees and the AMRC work on the materials. It's so much great stuff here. We almost need to grasp that, I think, as this collective now, which hopefully this call has done, and utilise venues like Skill Street, which I guess I would say is the guy developing it and the manager of it, but this is unique to our region. And it's not just the aircraft behind my head here, it's about everything Tom talked around cabin crew and the training behind that, the safety messaging, the fact that you're working with new team members, those soft skills and attributes. We're already touching on that at primary age from, at the minute, year 2 and year 3 upwards. The highest groups we've had so far in Skill Street activities year 10 and 11, but then that is the feeder into your colleges, your universities and the longer term picture. So just, I guess, stressing that we have the resource here. We have new venues like Skill Street that we can utilise. I'd be happy to work more collectively and showcase, I guess, this as a venue to anchor aviation skills in the region, really. So that was just my point, really, on capitalising on raising that aspiration that people can see it, they can be it.
You know what, that's exactly it, isn't it? And the fact that you physically got that there for people to be able to see, you can see how that will inspire next generation. And then, as you say, being able to link them to the various pathways. And sometimes the reality of that is based on the geography of where you live and whether you can get to a UTC or a college or a university. But what's great for us in this region is that we've got so much provision all across the patch. So, if anyone who's interested in a career in that can find a pathway. Thank you, James. I definitely need to come and visit that. Mark from the UTC, you've just popped a comment on as well to say UTC Sheffield City Centre, how you can support getting young people into the sector with the engineering and the creative side of it, which is obviously an aspect as well. And I know you'll be asking employers to engage with you the way that UTCs work. Employers go in and set a project, and it's generally kind of around 8 weeks to bring to life the theory of what they're learning and how they can bring that to life with employers. So that's something for us to take back to our employer community to encourage people to lean in. And then Nick Haig, you just popped a comment in, talent pipeline. So Nick, obviously you're from Sheffield Hallam University. Talent pipeline linked to outreach activities key for progression to FE and HE. So thanks thank you for all those comments. I'll just make sure no one else has a pressing question before we pass over to Dan. So final chance for anybody on the call that wants to ask any questions or indeed highlight any initiatives that they're involved in or engaged in that think could be relevant for the rest of the people on the call. Okay. Oh, I've got Shani and then also Dan. Shani, I'll come to you first and then Dan Swift.
Thank you. That was really, really useful. I think I just wanted to really make a note that actually as a region, I think the providers in the region actually do work very well together. And I think that we are very collaborative in kind of the stuff that we do. And I think that I can probably speak on behalf of everybody when I say that we will absolutely always welcome anybody from industry to come in and do guest speaking, masterclasses, projects, placements, site visits, like any form of engagement they want to do with our students. I think that as providers, we would absolutely welcome that. I know we've spoken a lot about sort of what we can do with kind of the young people and the students and things like that. But I think we sometimes forget as well that actually parents have a lot of influence in the decisions that our young people make and the routes that they go. And often that can be because of their own personal experiences, or actually they don't always understand all of the routes available. And I think aviation is probably one of those things where actually maybe there's a little bit of work we could do with parents as well about the array of opportunities available within aviation, and that it isn't kind of typically your cabin crew or a pilot, which some people are often kind of put off about anyway because of the training and also the cost. So actually maybe there's a little bit of work around kind of parents and stuff we can do there in terms of the opportunities available as well.
I think that's a really valid point, Johnny. And also, adult learners as well. We've got to be conscious that there are people who might want to, retrain and career move as well. But yeah, the role of families is absolutely key. And if they're not aware of the breadth of opportunity, they might think, it's just those couple of options that they're aware of. And Dan, if your hand's gone down, but I'm assuming you're going to come in, and then we've also got Adam Bond from the University of Sheffield as well.
Thanks, Louisa. So yeah, just picking up on the convos regarding the skills levy and things like that. So as we all know, obviously the levy has seen muted success or in some areas bigger success than others. There's talk about the skills levy. We spoke to the DFE at the LSIP event a couple of weeks ago. They were present. Their main concern is the opportunity for fraud on short courses in terms of providers or short courses being created just to use the skills levy. The main factor that we see is that it's more around the salary subsidy. Small employers at the minute, costing NI, costing salaries, things like that, they might want an apprentice, but in terms of being able to subsidise or afford that salary, not using the levy to obviously train the funding is the main feature. If they could afford the salary, they'd take on an apprentice. There's almost an argument to kind of go, so far, there's been 3.3 billion gone back into the levy, gone back into the treasury. Could that money be ring-fenced for small micro SMEs to use as salary subsidy as well as apprenticeship funding to see if we can engage that smaller market of employers? Obviously, that's a government levy, that's a government policy kind of thing. But I think to reuse that bucket of money that's been gone through the traditional levy and then not being used to then give a micro company or a small local employer 50% wage subsidy at year one, 25% wage subsidy at year two, and then by year three, they're pretty much fully up and running, would be a big, I think, financial assistance to small employers. Whether the government take that on board, and I don't get any commission or credit for it, but fair enough. But, that might be one idea that we could flout around. So that is a key factor. The centre of excellence thing, again, really good way for highlighting particular skill sets, but does it confuse the employers with just adding another layer of offer to an already existing provider offer? And how does that fit with or against the provider offer? Obviously, we had the Rail College, which would have been deemed a centre of excellence for rail, and that wasn't particularly successful in how it came around and obviously ended. So there would be a kind of a thing to consider regarding that kind of look in terms of potentially being too niche a market in a certain industry, because then you are definitely reliant on a certain cohort of employers giving you numbers if you're seen as a niche provider in a certain industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Adam, I'm going to come to you and then we'll go over to Dan Fell.
Cheers. So I guess I'm kind of agreeing particularly that the comment earlier about the kind of parents' perspective, and it's not just cabin crew and pilot. So so I head up some major partnerships at the university, and I kind of involved myself with supporting academic engagement with some of our larger organisations, including Rolls-Royce, Boeing, things like that. And some of the perspective I've had from conversations with some of these organisations recently is that one of the biggest things you can have is the visibility of the career opportunity. And so we were talking about scholarships, money on a plate for students to, sizable amount of money to sort of support some of the top students from some of these companies. And that's great, but we're sort of talking to some of the academics who teach these. And the bigger thing that's going to draw them is the academic opportunity. So the career opportunity, sorry. And when I mean that, I mean actually what are the routes in? What are the ways you can try test it out sort of thing? Can I go on a placement, a short placement, little 2-week thing? Is the sort of, what's the kind of visibility organization within the skills provider? And some people do that great. I'm not sort of suggesting that doesn't happen in places, but having something kind of really clear in that sort of is a kind of a space that is the thing that I think will make a massive difference. And again, like thinking in the context of some of these like scholarships and other things we're sort of looking to develop at the moment, we sort of look at some of the top students, and like the conversation goes along the lines of, this person's very well performing, they're one of the top 5 grades on wherever it is, and the academic says, yeah, they've already decided they don't want to work with this company. I can ask them, but they're not going to go. They've already decided where they want to go. I mean, you're age 21 or something like this, but like at the same time, that pool is kind of narrowing down, or it's getting smaller as you go over time. So I think that kind of visibility, I absolutely agree with the points on outreach and the kind of you make it clear to just people and kids and the students in schools and colleges and FE and everything. But having that kind of really clear kind of visibility, the careers opportunity, the routes in, the ways you could try it out to get an idea if it's a thing you want to do. Especially in the context of like the amount of competition in this space, you talked about the adjacent sectors, defence elsewhere. They're going to be fishing in a similar pool here. I'm saying nothing that I'm sure people are aware of, but like that if you don't know, then someone else is going to put it on the table, and then that might attract them. That's kind of where I was on this.
Thank you, Adam. No, that's a really interesting perspective on it. I am really grateful to everyone for all those questions and contributions. That's been, brilliant to have such that level of engagement. I'm going to hand over to Dan now. So thank you for everyone for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to Jack and Carl for that excellent report and, so insightful and so comprehensive. And thank you to everyone for their questions and contributions. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Lou. Appreciate that. Colleagues, normally when I close these sessions, I sort of finish with what happens next in terms of the local skills improvement plan and other insight activity that the chambers are leading on, and I'll get to that in a second. But given the subject matter, I should also do like 1 minute on what happens next with Doncaster Sheffield Airport, because that's the key project at the heart of this discussion, of course. So just on that, the airport is on a good critical path to success. So in recent months, we've seen central government confirm its support for the project, including sort of a 30 million cash contribution to the project, help to local and regional infrastructure that supports the airport's reopening. We're seeing the Civil Aviation Authority working at pace to sort of redesignate airspace around the airport. And then, based on a conversation myself, Lou, and our colleague Carrie had with Copard yesterday, it feels as though everything is currently on track for that kind of major funding decision early September, which releases the gain share money into the airport to allow for its reopening, and for sort of Doncaster City Council, Simca, to work at pace with Munich Airport, who've been referenced a few times, who are the appointed operators of the airport, to get the airport fully back up and running. We currently expect somewhere between late 27, early 2028, but that will be an iterative process with activities such as 2XL, who do things like border force and oil and gas recovery and all kinds of operations like that. They're back in situ already, they're operating. We then see freight coming back. We then see private jets, and then sort of the commercial aircraft coming last to kind of complete that jigsaw. But lots of opportunity, lots of positivity. Almost as exciting as reopening an airport, the Chambers will also be continuing to work on local skills improvement plans and articulating the skills needs of the employer community to colleagues like those on this call within our kind of public sector and education kind of world. So what's happening next in that space is over the summer, we're doing 2 more deep dives, one into sort of AI-led businesses and one into maximising the talents of veterans in South Yorkshire, some of whom are either unemployed or underemployed in our ecosystem. Opportunities for anyone to get involved with that, to kind of help shape and frame that research, or to help kind of start collaborating with us upstream in terms of what might happen next as a consequence of that. Or if indeed you just kind of want to read the reports and come to the webinar and find out what people have been saying in that space, you're very, very welcome to do so. So our AI webinar is scheduled for the 9th of September, and our report on veterans will be launched at the webinar on the 24th of September. Thereafter, there will be further iterations of the local skills improvement plan from October onwards. We're still at the sort of early design stages of that as Chamber colleagues, and also with the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. But the sort of honest and open call to anyone who's a partner or within the kind of skills system is like, just reach out, because we've got some tools, we've got the ability to kind of engage and reach out to businesses. And so if there's kind of lines of inquiry or things you want us to look into that might help you in your world, let us know and we'd be pleased to collaborate. And then finally, one other cheeky plug, in addition to local skills improvement plans, we have a sister project in many ways, our quarterly economic survey, which, as it says on the tin, sort of focuses on kind of, those overarching business conditions. But again, on a quarterly basis, we theme that and do sort of specialist deep dives into hot topics. So we've just completed our field work on sort of business support and business growth issues. We'll have a webinar that again is open to our sort of economic development partners on the 17th of July. You're more than welcome to attend. Please pass it on to your colleagues and friends. And then on the 23rd of October, presenting the quarter afterwards results. And that we have a bit of departure. We're looking at sort of mental health issues in sort of private sector leadership, because we think that would be some, a genuinely new topic and some interesting insight be thrown out of that. So thanks on behalf of the Chambers for attending today. If you're interested in the insight we're generating, thank you to everyone who's asked a question, posted a comment, endorsed our findings, challenged and critiqued our findings. All those provocations are sort of superbly helpful and very, very welcome. And then finally, thanks ever so much to our speakers and presenters today. So Tom, Dan, Jack, Carl, thanks as always. We hope to see you at the next one of these webinars. Take care, everyone. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.